It is not morning yet. That's the first thing you need to understand. It is not even properly morning yet, and you are already at work. You are standing ankle-deep in cold mud, in a long strip of a field that is not yours, behind an ox that is not yours either, and your bare feet have gone past aching into a kind of dull, wet numbness you will feel for the rest of the day. The sky over the trees is the color of dishwater. Somewhere ahead of you in the gray, the ox leans into the yoke, and the heavy wooden plow drags and shudders through the earth, and it is your job to keep it straight, to lean, to haul, to swear at the animal in a language it does not care about. Your hands are already raw, your back already hurts, and it will hurt like this every single day for the rest of your life. And this cold, muddy, aching hour before the sun is even up is not the hard part of your day. This is the beginning of it, because you are a peasant, and not just any peasant. You belong, in a way you can barely put into words, to the man who owns this field, and the mill, and the church you can see across the valley and very nearly you. And I am here to tell you, as kindly as I can while you're up to your ankles in that freezing muck, that you would not last a week at this. So let's stand in this field together for a while, you and I, and let me show you exactly what a life like this actually was, and how much of what you think you know about it is comfortable, tidy nonsense. My name's Marcus, and I should explain why I'm the one standing out here in the mud with you. I used to teach history, mostly to teenagers, mostly badly, and the medieval stuff was where I lost them completely, because they'd already decided they knew it. Knights, castles, plague, everyone filthy, everyone dead by 30, the end. And then I fell down the hole that ruined my weekends forever, which is reenactment. I spend an unreasonable number of my Saturdays out in a field, in wool and linen, cooking over a fire, sleeping rough, deliberately doing things the slow, cold, back-breaking old way, because it's the only method I've ever found that tells you the truth about how these lives actually felt in the body. And the medieval peasant is the one I come back to most, because it's the life we understand the least and dismiss the fastest. So I'm going to do two things at once today. I'm going to walk you through a serf's life, step by muddy step, and every time we hit one of the things you're sure you already know, I'm going to stop and check it, because a surprising amount of what you know about these people is wrong, and the truth is stranger and more interesting than the cartoon. Come on. The ox isn't going to wait, and neither is the Lord. First, let's kill the fantasy, because you brought one out to this field with you. When you picture the Middle Ages, you picture the top of it. You picture the castle on the hill, the knight on the horse, the king, the banquet, the cathedral. That's what fills the films and the fantasy novels and the video games. And I understand why it's magnificent, all of it. But here's the thing you have to get straight before we go one step further. You are almost certainly not any of those people. Practically nobody was. The overwhelming majority of people who lived in medieval Europe, the vast, vast majority, we're talking the great bulk of everyone alive, were peasants, farmers, people who worked the land with their hands and their backs and their oxen from childhood until their bodies gave out. The knight and the castle sat on top of a mountain of people exactly like the one you're standing in right now, up to your ankles in cold mud. For every one person in shining armor, there were a great many people in the field growing the food that kept the armor fed. That was the real Middle Ages, not the banquet, the field. And within that great mass of ordinary people, many, though, and I'll keep saying this, it varied enormously by where and when you were born, many were not simply poor. They were unfree. They were serfs, villains, bound to the land in a way that would horrify a modern person right down to the ground. And that word, unfree, is where we have to start, because it's the thing you would find hardest of all. So here is the shape of your whole world. You live on a manor, an estate held by a lord. It might be a knight, it might be a bishop, it might be a great monastery. The point is there is a lord, and the land is his. Your village, your strips in the field, the mill, the oven, the meadow, the woods where the pigs root, all of it hangs off that one fact. And you, if you are a serf, are not a free tenant who can pack up and leave. You are, in the cold language of the law, tied to the land, bound to it. When the land changes hands, you go with it, the way the barns and the fences go with it. Now, I want to be careful and precise here, because this is exactly the sort of thing that gets flattened into nonsense. A serf was not a chattel slave. You were not, in most times and places, an object that could be bought and sold on their own, separated from the land like a sack of grain. You had a household, a holding, customary rights, a place in a community that had its own rules the Lord was supposed to respect. And it is an enormous, but you were not free. You could not simply leave the manor and go make a life somewhere else. That took the Lord's permission, or running away and hoping. In many places you needed the Lord's leave, and a fee, for your daughter to marry, especially to marry away, off the manor, taking her labor with her. You needed his leave to send a son off to be schooled or apprenticed elsewhere. When the head of your household died, the Lord could take your best beast, your finest ox or cow, as a death duty before your family had even finished grieving. Your freedom to move, to marry, to plan, to keep the fruit of your own work, all of it ran through a man who thought of you, at best, as a productive part of his estate. Sit with that, because you can't, not really. You have spent your whole life assuming you can go where you like, love who you like, work where you like, keep what you earn. Strip all four of those away in a single morning and you begin, only begin, to feel the walls of the world you've just been born into. All right. Let's get back to the field, because the field is where your life mostly happens, and the field is not what you think either. You probably picture a farm as a tidy square of land with a fence round it, and a house in the middle, your land, your patch. Forget that completely. In much of medieval Europe, the land was worked in a great shared arrangement we call the open field system, and it would drive your modern mind slowly mad. Instead of one block of your own, your holding was scattered. Long, narrow strips, dozens of them, spread out across 2 or 3 enormous open fields, all mixed in higgledy-piggledy with everyone else's strips. A strip here, a strip 300 yards away, a strip on the far side of the village. You didn't farm your land so much as farm your share of everybody's land, all tangled together, with no hedges between you and your neighbor, just a furrow or a line of unplowed turf. And because it was all shared and interlocked, you couldn't just do as you pleased. The whole village had to farm more or less in step, plow together, sow the same crops in the same field at the same time, harvest together, and then throw the animals onto the stubble together afterwards to graze and manure it. Your farming decisions weren't yours. They belonged to the custom of the village and the will of the Lord's court. Even out here in the dirt, you are not your own man. And then there's the rotation, which is genuinely clever and worth understanding, because it ruled the rhythm of your year. Land that is cropped every single year gets exhausted and stops giving. Medieval farmers knew this in their bones, so in much of Europe they used a 3-field system. You'd divide the great fields into 3. One would grow a crop sown in autumn, your wheat or rye, your bread grain. One would grow a crop sown in spring, barley, oats, beans, peas. And the third would be left fallow, rested, unplanted for the year, grazed by the animals so their muck could feed it back to strength. And the next year they'd all rotate round. It was a slow, patient 3-year wheel, and it meant that at any given time a whole third of your precious land was deliberately growing nothing at all, because it had to, because that was the price of the soil not dying. Which tells you just how close to the edge the whole thing ran. You could not simply grow more by wanting more. The soil set the terms, and the labor that fed that soil, the actual physical work of it, is the thing I most want you to feel, because it never, ever stopped, and it would destroy your modern body faster than almost anything else here. There is no machine. That's the fact you can't hold in your head because you have never lived a single day without machines. Everything is your muscle, or an animal's. The plowing you started before dawn is just the opening move. Then there's the sowing, walking the strips, flinging seed by hand, hoping enough of it takes. Then the endless war against weeds, bent double, hour after hour. The hay to be cut with a scythe and turned and stacked. And then the harvest, which is the great terrible climax of the whole year, when every hand in the village, man, woman, child, the old, the barely able, works from first light to last, cutting the grain with hand sickles, gathering it, binding it, carrying it. Because if the weather turns and the crop rots in the field, you do not eat in the winter. It is that simple and that brutal. And then when it's cut, you're not done, you never get to be done. The grain has to be threshed, beaten out of the ear with a flail on a barn floor all winter, swing after swing after swing. There are hedges to lay, ditches to dig, firewood to gather, the ox and the pig and the few precious animals to tend, the roof to patch, tools to mend by hand. Winter is not a rest. Winter is just cold work instead of warm work. There is no season, no month, no week in which the labor lets go of you. I get a thin taste of this in my soft weekend way. I've spent a day reaping a small plot with a hand sickle the old way, bent over in the sun, and by the afternoon my back had locked up so badly I could barely stand, and my hands were a ruin, and I'd cleared a patch a modern machine does in about 4 seconds. One day, and I got to go home to a bath and painkillers and a sofa. You would do that, or worse, most days of your life, from the time you were a small child helping in the fields to the day your body finally couldn't. So let's total it up. It's the dark before dawn. You're barefoot in the cold mud behind an ox on land you don't own, doing work that will never once let go of you, for a lord who owns your labor and half your choices. And that's day one. You're already dead. All right, not literally, not on the first day. You're tougher than that, or your ancestors were. But the soft modern person who woke up inside this life this morning, the one who's used to warmth on demand and food on demand and rest whenever the body asks for it, that person is finished. Because the life you've just stepped into has no off switch, and no one is coming to make it stop. And we haven't even talked yet about what you owe. Because here's the part that turns the whole thing from merely hard into something that would genuinely crush your spirit. All that work you're doing, a great slice of it isn't even for you. As a serf, you don't just farm your own strips and keep what grows. You owe the Lord. And you owe Him in the oldest, most direct way there is, with your own body and time. This is called labor service, week work, the corvée, and it means that for a set number of days every week, you leave your own land and go work the Lord's land, the part of the estate He keeps for Himself, His personal fields for nothing. Free. Your muscle, your ox, your day, handed over because you were born owing it. And at the peak times, at the harvest, exactly when your own crop most desperately needs you, you owe Him extra days on top, so you're often forced to bring in His grain before you can save your own. Imagine the helplessness of that. The rain's coming. Your own family's food is standing ripe in your strip, and you are legally obliged to be over on his field instead. And it doesn't stop at your labor. You owe dues in kind, a share of your eggs, your hens, your grain, handed over through the year. You owe fees for things you cannot avoid doing. There's a fee in many places to grind your own grain, because you're not allowed to grind it at home with a hand quern. You must carry it to the Lord's mill and pay him in a cut of your own flour for the privilege. There's a fee when your daughter marries. There's that death duty, the best beast taken when a tenant dies. There are fines handed down in the Lord's own court, run by the Lord, for offenses against the Lord's rules. Money and grain and labor and animals, flowing constantly in one direction upward off you toward the man on the hill. You are not just poor. You are systematically, legally, endlessly drained, and it is written into the custom of the manor as the natural order of the universe. Now, the honest caveat, and I promise you one of these in every episode. The exact dues, the exact number of workdays, whether you were a deeply unfree villein or a freer tenant who paid rent in coin, how heavy the Lord's hand actually was. All of this varied enormously from manor to manor, region to region, and century to century. Serfdom in one valley looked quite different from serfdom 200 miles away or 200 years apart, and over time, in many places, labor service got quietly swapped for money rent. So hold the exact figures loosely, but the shape of it, you owe your body, your goods, and your obedience to a lord by birth. As a condition of being alive on his land, that shape is real, and it ran through the whole world you were born into. So after all of that, the labor, the dues, the endless taking, what do you actually get to eat? Less than you'd like and far less variety than you'd believe. Your life runs on grain. Bread if the harvest was decent, dark, heavy, coarse bread, nothing like the soft white loaf you know. And pottage, a thick simmering pot of whatever you had, grains and beans and peas and whatever greens or roots you could grow or gather, kept going on the fire day after day. The great endless soup at the center of peasant life. An ale, weak, everyday ale which was food as much as drink, calories you could keep and carry safer than a lot of the water. Meat. Rarely. You kept a pig, perhaps, and some hens, but the pig was wealth on legs, and much of the best of what you raised went up the hill as dues or got sold to pay what you owed. Meat was a feast day thing, a scrap and flavor thing, not a daily thing. Your diet was grain and vegetables and hope, and it was monotonous in a way your snack drawer, any cuisine-on-demand modern self can genuinely not imagine. The same pot, the same bread, season after season, and you would have counted yourself fortunate because the alternative to monotonous food was no food at all. I made a pot of proper peasant pottage once. The real thing, barley and dried peas and a few sad greens, no stock cube, no salt to speak of, cooked long and plain over the fire, and my wife B, who has endured a great deal in the name of my hobby, including the time she gamely tried a genuine medieval recipe and was quietly, thoroughly sick afterwards. B took one spoonful of the pottage, put the spoon down with enormous gentleness and said, "That's not dinner, love, that's punishment." And she was right. But that gray, plain pot was the good scenario, because the bad scenario was famine. And here is where the whole fragile machine could collapse and take you with it. You live one bad harvest away from disaster, always. Think about how thin the margin is. A third of the land deliberately fallow, no machines, no fertilizer as you know it, no way to store food well for long, no lorries bringing grain from 1,000 miles away when your own crop fails. Your whole survival depends on the weather being roughly kind, on the right rain at the right time, and the sun coming when it's needed. And the weather does not care about you at all. So when it turned, when several bad years came in a row, people starved. Not as a rare freak event, as a recurring feature of the world. The most famous case is the Great Famine that struck much of northern Europe from around 1315 to 1322. It began with relentless, catastrophic rain season after season of it that rotted the crops in the fields and drowned the harvest and killed the livestock, year upon year, across a whole continent. Food prices soared beyond reach. People ate their seed grain, which meant next year was worse. They ate things that weren't food, and across those years an appalling number of people, a share of the population it's genuinely hard to say aloud, simply starved to death, or were so weakened that the next fever finished them. And you, the modern you, would have had no defense against that at all. You have never in your life been truly hungry, the real, grinding, no-bottom kind of hungry where there is nothing and no plan and no help coming and you watch the field and the sky and know. That was a live possibility in every peasant's life. Not a nightmare, a weather forecast. And even in the good years, even with a full belly, something else was always moving through the village. Disease. You live crowded in with your animals, with no understanding of germs, no clean water as you define it, no antibiotics, no vaccines, no idea why people sicken. Childbirth is genuinely dangerous, for the mother and the child both. Wounds turn bad and there's little to be done. Fevers sweep through and take the weak, the old, and above all the very young. Illnesses you would shrug off today with a pill from a cupboard could kill you here, quietly, in a week. And then, once in a while, something far worse came. The greatest of them arrived in the mid-14th century, the Black Death, which tore through Europe from around 1347 to 1351. It killed a staggering share of the entire population of the continent. Historians argue over exactly how much, and the estimates are genuinely debated, but we are talking about something on the order of a third to a half of everyone. Let that land. Not a third of one town. A third to a half of everyone, everywhere, in a few short years. Whole villages emptied. Fields you'd worked your whole life stood with no one left to reap them. And here is the strange, dark twist that I love, because history is full of these, and it's the surprise I want you to carry out of this field. That horror, that catastrophe, ended up handing the survivors something they'd never had: leverage. Because when so many people die, the ones left alive suddenly matter more. There weren't enough hands to work the land. And a lord with fields and no one to plow them is a lord who suddenly, grudgingly, has to compete for your labor, offer better terms, lower dues, actual wages, or watch you walk to the next manor that will. Across the generations after the plague, in much of Western Europe, the old chains of serfdom began, slowly and unevenly, to loosen and rust and fall away. Not because anyone up the hill had a change of heart, but because the brutal arithmetic of survivors had shifted the ground under the whole system. The very disaster that could have ended you was also, for those who lived, the thing that began to set them free. Now I have to stop and bust two things you're absolutely certain about because they're both wrong and the truth is more interesting. The first is the one everyone says at parties. People back then all died at 30. You've heard it 100 times. And it is a myth, a genuine, stubborn, badly understood myth, and I need you to let it go. Yes, if you take the average life expectancy of a medieval peasant, you get a low, grim number, often around the 30s. But that average is a trick of the arithmetic, And here's the trick. So many babies and small children died. Infant mortality was appallingly high, that all those tiny lives cut short dragged the average right down. It does not mean a 30-year-old was old. It means that if you survived the deadly gauntlet of childhood, and that was the great filter, the thing that killed so many, then you had a very real chance of living on into your 50s, your 60s, and beyond. There were plenty of gray-haired old peasants. The village was not full of dead 30-year-olds. It was full of dead children, and the survivors who grew old around their memory. Say it properly, or don't say it at all. And the second myth is about the work, and it cuts the other way, so I have to be fair about it. I've spent this whole time telling you the labor never stopped, and in the sense that the farm always needs doing, that's true. But you were not, in fact, grinding at hard labor literally every single day of the year, and it's only honest to say so, because over the whole thing sat the church, and the church's calendar ruled the year. Sundays you did not do your servile work, and scattered through the year were a great many holy days, saints' days, feast days, the great festivals, days when heavy field labor was set aside, when there was church and often actual celebration, ale, games, a village gathering, a rough kind of holiday. Now, caveat, because you know I can't help it, historians genuinely argue over just how many such days off a peasant really got. The old cheerful claim that medieval people had more holidays than a modern worker is probably too rosy. A holy day was not always a full day of rest, and the farm's own demands, the harvest above all, didn't care what the calendar said. So the honest answer is, more rest than my it never stops would suggest, less than the internet sometimes promises and varying wildly by place and season. But the shape is real. Your year was not one gray, unbroken slog. It had a rhythm, and the bell that rang it was the church's. So let's be honest, finally, about where you, the actual modern you, would break and how fast. The body would go first. The sheer relentless physical labor, the plowing and reaping and threshing with muscle alone, day after day, would wreck a modern body that has never done a hard day's work without a machine to help it, inside a week. The food would grind you down next, the plainness, the monotony, the never quite enough, and the ever-present shadow of a bad harvest and real hunger. The diseases you have no immunity to and no defense against would be waiting. But I don't actually think any of those is what would truly finish you. I think it would be the powerlessness, the bone-deep fact of being unfree, that you couldn't leave, that you couldn't marry your daughter off without a man's permission and a fee, that a great share of your endless work went, by unbreakable custom, to someone else, that your whole life was hemmed in by a fate you were simply born into, with no ladder out of it you could see. You, who have spent every day of your life assuming the future is yours to choose, you would find the sheer immovability of that world its own kind of slow suffocation. You would not last a week as a medieval peasant. And I mean that with no insult in it at all. I wouldn't either, and neither would the toughest, gym-hardened person you know. Not because we're weak, because we're modern. We were shaped, every single day of our lives, by machines and choice and full plates and medicine, and the simple built-in assumption that our lives belong to us. And the peasant's world was built out of the exact opposite of every one of those things. And here's where I turn all of it around on you, because I didn't drag you out into that cold field just to make you grateful for your central heating, though you should be. Here's the thing I keep bumping into every single time I come back to these people, and it's uncomfortable, so I'll just say it plainly. We look down on the medieval peasant. We use the word itself as an insult. We picture them as filthy, stupid, backward, dead at 30, barely human, a punchline, a warm-up act for the real history of kings and knights. And almost every single thing we look down on them for is either wrong or is simply the shape of a life we would not survive for a week. These were people who could do things you cannot even slightly do. Grow their own food from bare earth. Read the sky and the soil. Build and mend and make with their hands nearly everything they touched. Endure cold and hunger and grief and back-breaking labor, and carry on and still find room on the saints' days for ale and games and singing and a wedding in the churchyard. They kept a whole civilization fed, every mouthful of it, with their bodies. And they did it while owning almost nothing and owing almost everything to a man on a hill. So maybe the useful thing to carry out of this field isn't "thank God I don't live like that." Maybe it's a bit of humility, because everything you have, the warmth, the food, the freedom, the unimaginable ease of your ordinary Tuesday, you have because you were born now and they were born then. You didn't earn the century you landed in. You just got lucky. And the least you can do, standing warm and fed and free in a world they could not have dreamed of, is stop using their name as an insult. So here's my question for you, and I read the comments genuinely, so tell me, which one do you think would actually break you first? The endless labor, the plain and precarious food, or the sheer powerlessness of being unfree, tied for life to another man's land? Be honest with yourself. Put it down below, I really want to know. I'm off to keep cheerfully toughening up my nephew Cody, who last week described the Wi-Fi going down for 20 minutes as, and I quote, "a genuinely dark time." We are going to have a conversation about the three-field system, and my mate Phil, who once passed out cold in full armor on a warm afternoon, wants us to try plowing a strip behind a borrowed animal next month, which means one of us is going to end up face down in a furrow. And it is statistically always Phil. If standing in that field with me made you look at your warm, fed, free little life a bit differently. And if you want me to drop you into another world where you also, let's be honest, would not last, then subscribe and come back, because I've always got somewhere harder to take you. My name's Marcus. Mind the mud. And go enjoy something ordinary today on purpose. You've no idea how good you've got it.